The sunrise painted Washington, D.C. in amber hues, bathing the Lincoln Memorial in golden light that seemed almost too perfect, too symbolic. Pam Bondi stood on the steps, alone, watching the early joggers and tourists filter through the National Mall. Her navy suit absorbed the morning chill, her hands wrapped around a leather portfolio that contained what some would soon call the most dangerous document in America. She checked her watch, 6:42 a.m. The hearing would begin at 9 a.m., but she needed this moment, this silence, to prepare for what would likely be the most consequential day of her career. The weight of the portfolio seemed to increase with each passing minute. Inside were pages that could reshape American governance for decades to come. Her phone vibrated. "They're ready for the pre-briefing," her chief of staff texted. Bondi took one last look at the memorial, at Lincoln's stoic face watching over a divided nation. "History doesn't repeat," she whispered to herself, "but it does rhyme." As she turned to leave, a tourist approached, smartphone extended for a selfie. "Aren't you Pam Bondi? I follow you on social media." The woman beamed, already positioning herself beside the former Attorney General. Before we continue with what happened next, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. This story contains information that every American needs to hear, and YouTube's algorithm might bury this video. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this with someone who needs to see it. Now back to that crucial morning in D.C. "Not today, I'm sorry," Pam said with a polite but firm smile, stepping past the woman whose face fell in disappointment. Bondi's mind was elsewhere, on the folder, on the hearing, on the faces of the committee members who had no idea what she was about to unveil. The Russell Senate office building hummed with activity, but room 325 remained eerily quiet. Staffers arranged microphones and tested recording equipment with practiced efficiency. Name placards lined the horseshoe-shaped table: Senator Williams, Senator Chen, Senator Morales, Senator Burton, each representing different states, different parties, different Americas. At the center, a single witness chair faced them all, positioned like an island in a churning political sea. The doors were still closed to the public, but behind them, reporters gathered like predators scenting blood. Most assumed this was just another oversight hearing, another day of partisan theater. They had no idea. Inside the preparation room, Pam Bondi sat with her small team, reviewing her opening statement one final time. "They'll try to discredit you immediately," her advisor warned, a former DOJ prosecutor with eyes that had seen too many political battles. "Williams will go for your credibility, Chen will question your motives, and Burton will be on his phone pretending not to care until it's his turn to grandstand," Pam finished, a hint of a smile crossing her otherwise tense expression. "I've done this before." "Not like this," her advisor replied, tapping the portfolio. "Not with this." The room fell silent. They all knew what was at stake. The document, compiled over 18 months of quiet investigation, outlined in painstaking detail how foreign entities had infiltrated America's digital infrastructure at levels far deeper than anyone had publicly acknowledged. But it wasn't just the foreign infiltration that made the report explosive. It was the names, senators, representatives, governors, tech executives who had been compromised, who had knowingly or unknowingly allowed backdoor access to systems containing everything from voter registration, databases to power grid controls. Pam straightened her jacket, checked her reflection one last time, and nodded to her team. America deserves to know, whatever the cost. At precisely 9 a.m., the doors opened. The press flooded in, cameras whirring, boom mics extending like curious antennae. Committee members took their seats, some chatting amiably across party lines, others studiously avoiding eye contact with colleagues they'd attacked on television the night before. Senator Williams, the chairman, tapped his microphone twice. "This hearing will come to order." His voice carried the weary authority of a man who'd presided over too many proceedings that changed too little. "Today we welcome former Attorney General Pamela Bondi to discuss cyber infrastructure vulnerabilities and potential foreign interference in domestic systems." The room settled. Notepads open, recorders on, eyes forward. Pam Bondi approached the witness table with measured steps. The fluorescent lights caught the silver accents in her blonde hair, lending her an almost ethereal appearance that belied the gravity of her purpose. She arranged her materials, poured a glass of water that she wouldn't touch, and leaned into the microphone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Chen, distinguished members of the committee. I come before you today not as a partisan, not as a former prosecutor, but as an American who has uncovered something that threatens the very foundation of our republic. The standard opening pleasantries were conspicuously absent. No gratitude for the invitation, no honor to be here, no recognition of the committee's important work. Just stark urgency. Senator Williams shifted in his seat, already uncomfortable with the deviation from protocol. Ms. Bondi, perhaps you'd like to provide some context. Context is precisely what I'm here to provide, Senator, she interrupted, her voice firm but controlled. For the past 18 months, I've been leading a private investigation into vulnerabilities in our critical infrastructure systems. What we discovered goes beyond partisan concerns. It transcends electoral politics. It demands immediate action. She opened the portfolio, removing a sealed envelope that she handed to the clerk. This contains the full report, which I'm submitting for the record. But before the committee reviews it, Americans need to understand what we're facing. The clerk took the envelope with visible uncertainty, looking to the chairman for guidance. Williams nodded reluctantly, and the document was officially entered into the congressional record, a procedural move that would make its contents nearly impossible to suppress. Pam leaned forward, her eyes moving from senator to senator. 5 years ago, a series of seemingly unrelated system failures occurred across various sectors. Brief power outages in Phoenix, voter database glitches in Michigan, transportation grid malfunctions in Atlanta. Minor inconveniences, quickly resolved and quickly forgotten. The room remained silent, reporters poised over notebooks, senators unnaturally still. These weren't isolated incidents. They weren't accidents. They were tests. Her voice dropped slightly, forcing everyone to lean in. Tests to see how our systems would respond, how quickly we would identify intrusions, and how effectively we could restore operations. Senator Chen interjected, Ms. Bondi, are you suggesting these were coordinated attacks? By whom? Pam didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pressed a button on her tablet, and the large screen behind her illuminated with a map of the United States, crisscrossed with glowing red lines that pulsed like arteries. This represents data flow through critical infrastructure systems on November 14 of last year. Power grids, water treatment facilities, election systems, emergency response networks. The red lines indicate traffic that was intercepted, copied, and transmitted to servers outside U.S. jurisdiction. The map was a web of crimson, concentrated in key battleground states in major metropolitan areas. My God, whispered Senator Morales, forgetting her microphone was live. The syllables echoed through the chamber. Pam nodded, acknowledging the appropriate reaction. Indeed, but interception is just the beginning. She switched to a second slide, showing a complex network diagram. These are administrator access logs for the same systems. The highlighted accounts, over 300 of them, were created using legitimate credentials, but without the knowledge of the authorized users. How is that possible? Senator Burton finally looked up from his phone, his practiced indifference cracking. Because those with legitimate access were compromised, Pam replied, her voice steady but laced with controlled anger. Some through sophisticated phishing campaigns, others through blackmail, and some. She paused, ensuring every word landed with precision. Some through direct financial incentives. The room erupted. Reporters turned to each other in disbelief. Senators leaned to whisper to aides. Cameras clicked frantically. Senator Williams banged his gavel repeatedly. Order! Order! When the noise subsided, he turned to Pam, his face flushed. Ms. Bondi, you're making extraordinary claims that border on accusing elected officials of treason. I hope you understand the seriousness. I understand it better than most, Senator, she cut in, her voice glacial. Page 217 of the report details transfers totaling $4.7 million from shell companies in Singapore and Cyprus to accounts linked to individuals with direct access to these systems. Page 342 identifies 12 current members of Congress who have received similar payments. A stunned silence fell over the room. The implications were staggering. "Are those names public?" a reporter shouted from the back, breaking protocol. Senator Williams banged his gavel again. "This hearing will maintain order. Ms. Bondi, these allegations—" "Aren't allegations," she corrected. "They're documented facts, verified by forensic accountants and cybersecurity experts whose credentials are unimpeachable. Their sworn affidavits are included in Appendix C." She stood now, abandoning the formal posture of congressional testimony. Her voice rose not in volume but in intensity, drawing everyone deeper into her warning. "While we argue about border policies and tax rates, legitimate issues worthy of debate, our adversaries have been quietly purchasing the keys to our most critical systems. They haven't needed to launch a conventional attack because they've been invited in through the front door." In the rear of the hearing room, a man in an unremarkable gray suit reached for his phone, typing rapidly. 3,000 miles away, in a glass-walled office overlooking San Francisco Bay, a tech executive's phone buzzed with a message. "Bondi's going public. Full disclosure. Containment impossible." The executive closed his eyes briefly, then opened his laptop to initiate emergency protocols that had been prepared for this very scenario. Senator Chen leaned forward, her usual composure shaken. "Ms. Bondi, you mentioned these intrusions were tests. Tests for what exactly?" Pam took a slow breath. This was the moment, the line between the world before and the world after. "For the complete takeover of America's essential services, Senator. Not through violence, not through conventional warfare, but through a digital siege that could bring this country to its knees without a single shot being fired." She pressed her tablet again, and the screen displayed a timeline. 3 weeks ago, we detected unusual activity across multiple systems. Subtle changes to code, modified access permissions, new backdoor accounts. The pattern matched pre-attack preparations identified by intelligence agencies in previous international incidents. Her voice became more urgent. "We believe these systems have been prepared for a coordinated shutdown that could disable power to major cities, disrupt water treatment facilities, freeze transportation networks, and cripple emergency response systems, all simultaneously." The room remained eerily quiet, the weight of her words too heavy for immediate reaction. "When would this happen?" Senator Burton asked, all pretense of disinterest abandoned. Pam's gaze locked with his. "That's the question that keeps me awake at night, Senator. It could be tomorrow. It could be during the next election. It could be when we're facing another crisis and are most vulnerable. The triggers are in place. They're just waiting for the most devastating moment to pull them." Outside the Russell Building, tourists strolled past, snapping photos of the Capitol dome gleaming in the late morning sun. Inside, the air had become thick with tension, the room uncomfortably warm despite the building's powerful air conditioning. Senator Williams finally found his voice. "What are you suggesting we do, Ms. Bondi? If what you're saying is accurate, it is, then this requires a coordinated federal response." Pam smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That would be the obvious solution, wouldn't it? Except the federal agencies that should address this have been systematically understaffed, underfunded, and undermined by the very people who benefit from these vulnerabilities." She extracted another document from her portfolio. "This is a list of cybersecurity initiatives proposed over the last 5 years. All were quietly killed in committee or defunded in omnibus packages. The margin notes indicate which lobbyists opposed each measure and which elected officials changed their positions after meetings with those lobbyists." She handed it to the clerk, who passed it to Senator Williams. The chairman's face darkened as he skimmed the document. "The conventional safeguards have been compromised," Pam continued. "That's why I'm bringing this directly to the American people. They need to see this before it's too late." Senator Morales, who had remained largely silent, finally spoke. "You keep saying, before it's too late. What exactly is your timeline?" "Based on the acceleration of infiltration activities and the historical patterns we've analyzed, we believe a major event could be triggered within the next 60 to 90 days. The press gallery erupted again, reporters already drafting headlines that would dominate news cycles for weeks. In a secure conference room at the Pentagon, military officials watched the hearing unfold on multiple screens. "Did we know about this?" demanded a general, turning to his intelligence officers. Portions, sir, admitted a pale-faced analyst. We flagged anomalies in the power grid last year, but the White House classified the assessment, said it would cause unnecessary public alarm. The general's face hardened. Get me the secretary, now. Back in the hearing room, Senator Chen was visibly struggling to maintain her composure. Ms. Bondi, if federal agencies have been compromised as you suggest, what exactly are you asking us to do? Pam closed her portfolio deliberately, her movements precise and measured. First, acknowledge the reality we're facing. Stop treating cybersecurity as a partisan issue or a hypothetical concern. Second, create an independent commission with extraordinary authority to audit and secure these systems, bypassing the agencies and officials who failed to act. Third, pass emergency legislation requiring immediate implementation of basic security protocols across all critical infrastructure. She paused, then added with unmistakable firmness. And fourth, hold accountable every individual, regardless of position, wealth, or political affiliation, who facilitated this vulnerability, whether through negligence, greed, or malice. Senator Burton scoffed. You're essentially calling for a purge of government officials based on an independent investigation that none of us have been able to verify. I'm calling for accountability, Senator, Pam countered, her eyes narrowing. Something this body seems increasingly unfamiliar with. The barb landed. Burton's face flushed as he leaned into his microphone. This is nothing but a political stunt. You have no official standing, no authority to conduct such an investigation, and frankly, a history of partisan activism that undermines your credibility. Pam didn't flinch. Attack me all you want, Senator. It won't change the facts. It won't secure our infrastructure. And it certainly won't protect the American people when these systems fail. She turned to face the cameras directly, abandoning the pretense of addressing only the committee. Americans need to understand what's at stake. This isn't about politics. It's about whether you'll be able to access clean water, reliable electricity, emergency services, or your bank accounts when this crisis comes to a head. It's about whether our nation can function as an independent democracy when foreign entities have their finger on the off switch. In homes across America, viewers who had tuned in expecting another forgettable congressional hearing found themselves unable to look away. In a suburban kitchen in Ohio, a mother called her husband to turn on the TV. In a college dorm in California, students huddled around a laptop, streaming the testimony with growing alarm. In a retirement community in Florida, residents gathered in the common room, the usual card games forgotten as they watched in stunned silence. Senator Williams, recognizing he was losing control of the hearing, attempted to redirect. Ms. Bondi, while these concerns are certainly serious, I think we need to maintain perspective. Our systems have redundancies, our agencies have protocols, which have failed repeatedly in simulations, she interrupted. Page 89 outlines 5 tabletop exercises conducted by CISA and the Department of Energy. In every scenario, critical systems remain compromised for an average of 47 days. That's 47 days of major American cities without reliable power, water, or emergency services. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to an almost intimate level that somehow carried more power than a shout. Imagine New York City without electricity for 47 days. Imagine Los Angeles without functioning water treatment. Imagine Chicago with disabled 911 services. Now imagine all of it happening simultaneously in the middle of winter or during a natural disaster or on Election Day. The room fell silent again, the scenario too horrifying to interrupt. We're not talking about inconvenience. We're talking about chaos. We're talking about conditions that could lead to societal breakdown in a matter of weeks. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes betrayed the emotion behind her words. I've seen the potential casualty figures. I cannot in good conscience keep them to myself any longer. Senator Morales, her hands visibly shaking, asked the question everyone was thinking. How many, Ms. Bondi? What are the projected casualties? Pam closed her eyes briefly. In a worst-case scenario, with coordinated infrastructure failures across major metropolitan areas, sustained for the full 47 days. She paused, forcing herself to say the words. The models suggest fatalities in the tens of thousands, primarily among the elderly, the ill, and the very young, those most vulnerable when systems fail. A collective gasp swept through the room. This was no longer political theater. It was a nightmare scenario delivered in the measured tones of someone who'd seen the evidence too clearly to doubt it. The hearing continued for another hour, but the pattern was set. Senators oscillated between disbelief, attempts at discrediting, and moments of genuine alarm. Pam Bondi remained unshakable, responding to each question with specific references to pages in her report, each assertion backed by data that grew more difficult to dismiss. As the session wound down, Senator Williams, looking exhausted, asked the final question. Ms. Bondi, given everything you've presented, what do you want the American people to take away from this hearing? Pam gathered her materials slowly, considering her words carefully. When she spoke, her voice carried not just to the committee and the press, but to millions of viewers who had joined the live stream as word of her testimony spread. I want them to understand that our nation faces a threat unlike any in our history, invisible, patient, and potentially devastating. I want them to demand that their elected officials address these vulnerabilities immediately, regardless of party or politics. She stood, preparing to leave, then added, but most importantly, I want them to prepare. Communities need contingency plans. Families need emergency supplies. Individuals need to understand that the systems we take for granted are more fragile than we've been led to believe. Her final words resonated with chilling clarity. The warning signs are flashing red. We can address this now, or we can explain to our children why we saw it coming and did nothing. As Pam Bondi exited the hearing room, reporters swarmed, shouting questions she wouldn't answer. Her security team formed a protective barrier, guiding her through the chaos to a waiting vehicle. Inside the car, her chief of staff's phone buzzed continually with notifications. It's everywhere, he said, scrolling through news alerts. Every network, every major newspaper. Bondi warning is trending #1 worldwide. Pam stared out the window as the car pulled away from the Capitol. And the senators on the list? Burton's already issued a statement calling you a fearmonger. 3 others are preparing defamation suits. The rest are silent. She nodded, having expected nothing less. And the White House? No official comment yet. Sources say they're in emergency meetings. The car turned onto Pennsylvania Avenue, passing barricades and security checkpoints that seemed suddenly inadequate against the threat she described. In the distance, the White House gleamed white against the blue sky, a symbol of American strength that now seemed dangerously exposed. Did we do the right thing? Her chief of staff asked quietly. Pam Bondi watched a family of tourists taking photos, blissfully unaware of the storm she'd just unleashed. We gave them a chance, she said finally. Whether they take it, that's up to them now. As the car accelerated away from the Capitol complex, her phone lit up with a message from an unlisted number. Protocols initiated. Safe houses compromised. Use backup. They're moving faster than we anticipated. She deleted the message without reacting, maintaining the composed expression that gave nothing away. The game had changed, but she'd been playing it long enough to know the next move. America had been warned. Now came the harder part, surviving long enough to help them prepare for what was coming. The sun still shone brightly over Washington, but to Pam Bondi, shadows seemed to lengthen across the city she'd spent her career trying to protect. Time was running out, and the clock had been ticking long before most Americans even knew there was a countdown. In offices across the Capitol, phones rang with urgent demands for information. In server rooms around the world, activity surged as those implicated in her testimony rushed to cover their tracks. And in an unmarked building just outside the Beltway, a team of cybersecurity experts worked frantically to implement the contingency plans they'd prepared for this moment. The moment when Pam Bondi finally told America what they needed to see before it was too late.